Banks are collapsing. Here's why by CoffeeZilla.
Bank failures in history happened this week. But before we talk about why, I have a question.
Because I got a message from stock market app that I'm using. They emailed me telling me that something about some banks in the US are like we're not associated with those banks. Our the money you put with us is in this bank, not we're not associated in those banks. So I think this is related to that.
Why is Jim Cramer so good at being so bad at his job?
I don't know that
months
guy.
before they both collapsed, he said this.
These are never, ever talked about. Why? Because they're too boring? I like to make money. Boring is good. Watch out for Signature Bank. That's my fave. SVB Financial, don't you want? This company's a merchant bank with a deposit base that Wall Street has been mistakenly concerned about. This morning, we witnessed the second largest bank failure in American history,
Ooh.
which naturally created a wave of fear as the day went on.
Oh shit, that crashed. BSP also issued a statement earlier today about how the America stuff won't affect our markets. Yeah. Well, it makes sense because as the central bank, you want the people whom you serve to feel at ease, you know. You want to retain their confidence in you. And maybe it's actually affecting, and it could be a PR thing that, just message them that it's fine, but it's not fine. But it is what it is. Shit happens. And unfortunately, people's money are at stake. People's hard-earned money. Bro, that went from, it peaked at 32.4, then it dropped to 31.8. What a drop. In 2 hours. From 12 p.m. to 2 p.m.
Ultimately losing 345 points, S&P falling 1.45%, and the NASDAQ tumbling 1.76%.
Now, I have to admit, he has a way with sound effects. Now I understand why they call it mad money.
Looks like this
But there
value of
is
my
one thing
cinnamon
Jim
cookie
Cramer
clicker.
isn't wrong about.
It is what it is.
I know, is shocking. Fear is in the air, and many are worrying, is
Yeah.
my bank safe? So today I thought we'd break it all down.
That's a question.
The recent collapses, why the government has announced a special bailout, why some people are happy with it and others are mad, and of course, what's next.
Why
Let's
did it
start with
collapse?
the facts.
What is the reason?
3 major banks in the United States have failed in a short period of time. Silvergate, Signature Bank, and Silicon Valley Bank. Now,
All at the same
Silvergate
time?
was the smallest with about 11 billion in assets. Signature was like the mid-sized one, and Silicon Valley Bank was the largest. Now, Silvergate and Signature Bank were well known in the crypto space, while Silicon Valley Bank was massive in the tech startup world. However, despite their differences, these banks failed for similar reasons at a high level, which is this. They all experienced a run on the banks when too many people demand too much money too fast, and the banks don't have cash on hand.
Huh? You mean they couldn't give the money that they should have supposedly stored? The Africa thing? What's the Africa thing?
Now, I want to make something clear. It would be easy to draw the comparison to the crypto crash in 20.
I think a similar situation happened in Zimbabwe a few years ago. Oh, I think it's the same thing that happened with FTX, isn't it? Where all the investors wanted to pull their money out, but then FTX didn't have the money because FTX was investing all the money as out. I think that's how it happened.
2022, when several crypto companies like FTX collapsed.
Oh, there
But
it
there's
is.
an important difference. Companies like FTX were insolvent. When there was a run on their banks, they had
Can't pay
no
debts.
money to give.
Yeah.
Whereas the banks we're talking about were illiquid, meaning they had the money, but when they had the bank run, some of it was locked up in long-term assets like bonds. Now, to be clear, these are not the same things at all.
Okay.
But things can get a little fuzzy in the details. For example, when a bank run happens, what can start as a liquidity problem can become an insolvency problem if the bank has
How?
to sell what they have for cash. And let me explain. One of the safest investments
Yeah,
is
that makes
considered
sense.
to be treasury bonds.
Treasury
Your
bonds, yeah.
grandparents probably invest in it. Banks invest in them, both for the same reason. They provide a stable rate of return. So say your Signature Bank, right? You've got
And you're sure to get a return.
billions of dollars in customer assets. Where do you put it? Well, into treasury bonds, which let's say earn you 1% a year. You keep some cash on hand for withdrawals, but you figure, look, if I need to sell these, I can sell my bonds, right? But what happens if interest
Everybody
rates
sells?
rise really quickly? Well, suddenly you have this 5-year bond you bought a year ago, which gives you 1% a year.
Mhm.
But now the government is selling the same 5-year bond and
For
offering
5%.
5%. Because of that, now your
You're
bond's
paying
value on
up.
the open market drops. It's no longer even worth what you paid for it because it's giving less interest than other bonds. And so if you try to sell that, well, now you lose money.
Yeah.
Now, to be clear, if you held the bond to maturity, well, you would still make that 1% and not lose anything. But when depositors are asking for cash, it's simply not an option to hold on. Now, I know that seems complicated, but
Because they have to sell the bonds. Because the stuff is invested in the bonds. So in order to give the cash, they have to sell bonds for the cash. And they have to sell the bonds for a lower value. If my logic is correct.
the essence of it is this. Banks were forced to sell long-term assets that they didn't want to sell, like bonds, and they took losses because of these
Yeah,
bank
there it
runs.
is.
Because of that, what started as a
What?
liquidity
Wait.
crisis-
To fund the redemption, Silicon Valley Bank sold on Wednesday a 21 billion bond portfolio consisting mostly of US Treasuries. The portfolio was yielding an average of 1.79%, far below the current 10-year Treasury yield of 3.9. This forced Silicon Valley Bank to recognize a 1.8 billion loss, which it needed to fill through a capital raise. That's huge. Losing 1.8 billion dollars. Even if you're like a huge bank, that's a fucking shot. That's a hole in the wallet.
of that, what started as a liquidity crisis became an insolvency crisis, and that's why they got shut down, because they weren't going to be able to service all those withdrawals. So now what, right? Doesn't the government guarantee bank deposits? Why are we even talking about this? Well,
Yeah, it's supposed to.
they kind of do. The FDIC insures up to
There's
$250,000 per account.
$250,000. Okay.
However, at places like Silicon Valley Bank, they had a lot of accounts with a lot more than that. Because as we spoke of, they hosted a lot of venture capital, startups that
Companies that have disclosed exposure with Silicon Valley Bank. The bank invested in these. I see. And their money stuck in these? Probably.
it might have had anywhere from $10 to $50 million in there. And suddenly, that company, which was healthy yesterday, now can't get access to that money and can't meet payroll because their bank had failed.
Yeah.
And this triggered a huge response from many in Silicon Valley to call for depositors to have their
Couple of SB 1.250K is too low. It is insane that a small company with 2.5 million payables and payroll at the end of the month should be prudent and split their cash across 10 banks in case of a run. Fees and admin would be crazy. Great for banks. I mean, it seems like mismanagement.
their money guaranteed, with people like Jason Calacanis saying, you should be absolutely terrified right now. That is the proper reaction to a bank run and contagion. Guarantee all deposits up to $10 million or this will spiral into chaos. And comments like this sparked a huge debate on whether the government should or would get involved. Ultimately, with the answer coming on
it's
Sunday,
insured,
the U.S.
isn't it?
Treasury said this, quote, depositors will have access to all of their money. And there you have it.
There it
The
is.
U.S. government is stepping in to save not only Silicon Valley Bank, but
the
also
people.
Signature Bank as well. They did this citing a
all the
systemic
banks.
risk exception, which really boils down to a single idea. Please don't panic, guys. Please don't take out your money. Ultimately,
Yep,
the
there it
U.S.
is.
government doesn't want you worried about your bank deposits. However, not everyone saw this as a win. Many were quick to point out that, once again, the government only seems to step in to help a certain type of person. Quote, Mark Cuban,
Yeah, the big
bail out
banks.
Silicon Valley Bank tonight. Feds, approved. Goldman Sachs needs $824 billion, approved. JP Morgan Chase needs $416 billion, approved. Average Joe, my wife has cancer. Can we get Medicare? We're broke. Now, I do have to tell you that those in favor
It's
of the
true.
Fed's actions will tell you that this is an unfair characterization, that it's not the super rich getting bailed out. They'll point out that this isn't a traditional bailout at all because it only applies to the depositors and that executives and shareholders will get nothing. And that's
To be fair, if the government does not bail out the bank, if the government does not help the bank, the clients, the depositors are gonna get fucked. So I think they're doing the right thing here.
sounds good, except for the fact that some executives and shareholders in Silicon Valley Bank had already cashed out.
Oh shit! Oh no! I said they sold a lot of their shares. Oh god, bro, you're an executive of the company you're in, and then you sold out. Holy! Sold 11%, sold 19%, sold 32%, sold 25%. Since Feb 1, the CMO knew.
With Greg Becker, the CEO, selling $3.6 million worth of his shares right before their collapse. And this gets even worse when you consider that Greg Becker was one of the people who lobbied to deregulate his own bank. According to Heather Landy of Quartz, quote, the ability of these banks to fly under the radar in the US was no accident. Greg Becker, SVB's CEO, lobbied U.S. officials several years ago to raise the asset threshold at which banks would be considered systemically important. So let's get this straight. They faced less regulatory scrutiny because they weren't systemically important, according to them, but when everything goes wrong, they're systemically risky and must be bailed out. It's a classic case of wanting it both ways. Now,
I didn't understand
this
any of that.
isn't the same as the full bailouts we saw in 2008. And regardless of whether you land on whether there should have been or should not have been a bailout, the idea that systemically risky banks should get special treatment and regular banks, I guess, don't, sends a pretty clear signal.
Oh, it's
if you're rich,
there's a
you
difference
should
in
move your money
treatment.
into banks that are too big to fail. Otherwise, you run a systemic risk of ending up on Jim Cramer, feeling like this.
That's crazy. Can you imagine if that happened here? That'd be chaos. That'd be fucked. Actually, I'd be fucked. A lot of people would be fucked.